Hey everybody, and welcome to Let's Look at Card Dungeon. You might be saying, Card Dungeon, that game sounds familiar. Well, may I direct you to the 3,000 games that have come out over the course of the past few years with either card or dungeon in the title. I'm being a little bit overly cynical, but you may have also heard of it because originally this was a game that I believe was in like the Chrome App Store. I think I played it like 2 or 3 years ago, unless I'm going to get confused with something else. I thought I played it a few years ago in the Chrome App Store, but it's also an Android app, and I believe it might have come out for iOS as well. At least a lot of the reviews that I've seen for the game are coming from sites like Touch Arcade, which is a mobile game review site. Now it's available on Steam. It's $10, which is a good price point, I think, even though it seems originally weird, because people are like, oh, you know, it's an iOS port, it should be $3, it's $1 on iOS. I think it was $4 on iOS or on mobile. So, you know, $10 for a full-fledged PC port seems pretty reasonable. I'll explain a little bit more about what's going on with the game as we play here, but this is a game that is definitely visually really interesting in terms of its presentation, really lovingly evocative of kind of like, you know, collectible card games and also tabletop RPGs. Mechanically interesting, a little bit uneven, not necessarily something that I consider really hits the pinnacle of the genre when it comes to like dungeon crawling. I don't want to call it pseudo-roguelike, but it does have permadeath in it. And it's not really procedurally generated either. It is, but the quests are the same every time, if that makes sense. I played about an hour so far. Apologies if any of that seems like misinformation. So, the first thing I'm going to complain about is, and this comes up a lot in iOS ports or Android ports. I don't want to vilify iOS, just, you know, mobile ports in general. I feel like the UI is not really well optimized to PC. I'm playing on 1920 by 1080 right now, and it's really hard to see the cards. Like, zoomed out, it's impossible. I cannot read this. So, I mean, you know, if you forced me to, I probably could, but it's not convenient. You can click on it to make it larger, but it also, this highlights another thing. It's got kind of a weird framiness associated with that is a relatively minor complaint, but I'm not a huge fan of it. It just seems like, you know, I'm not saying UI or UX design is easy, but it definitely feels like this was designed for, you know, a platform that maybe didn't have this much blank space on the sides, literally doing nothing with it. It definitely feels like a game that was designed for kind of like that portrait-style phone resolution. Anyway, when you start a game, this will come up later as well. We're going to be clicking on cards constantly to read them. When you start a character, we are a Crusader here. You get to pick one good trait and one bad trait. We only have one good trait unlocked. This is Crusaders Breath. A small prayer uttered under your breath heals you for 5 health points randomly at the start of your turn. Costs 1 mana each time you are healed. So, basically an RNG passive, and when it procs, you heal for 5 and lose 1 mana. You don't get a choice in the mana, so we'll drag that up there. We do, by the way, have something called a Knowledge Gem. You use said Knowledge Gems to unlock other traits. However, oh, we actually managed to make it work. Disregard this. I was like, I can't seem to make it work. You drag the card up to the gem instead of the gem to the slot on the card. Maybe I'm being pedantic, but that's not my favorite. Coward. You are a bit of a coward every time you see a new enemy, you move 1 step away from it. Or Cheapskate. You keep a tight grip on your purse strings and can only make 1 purchase at the shop. I think Cheapskate is honestly pretty okay. We'll put that in our negative slot. And that's going to be our Crusaders, so there is kind of a light character creation. That doesn't bother me, honestly. I think it's cool that it's simplified. And in games like Dungeons of Dreadmore, I keep mining that for comparison, even though it's like 4 years old at this point, and Gaslamp is working on a completely different, like, sandbox, city building, almost village building type game. But in those games, there's almost an overwhelming amount of options for my personal taste, which is great if you're into that sort of thing. I'm okay with the 1 positive, 1 negative trait. That still gives you a lot of different permutations, even if there's maybe not as much synergy necessarily between them. Again, I can't help. It's something that I don't really think about all that much, but there's so much empty space on the sides here. Like, it's, again, a minor complaint, but you can definitely feel that this was, I'm not going to say they just, you know, exported it in a different file format or something like that to put it on PC, but you can definitely tell that this was not originally designed for, you know, 16 by 9 resolution. So, that was our list of adventures, basically. We're going to start with the first adventure, and this is Gorbash's Doomed Isle. It's always Gorbash's Doomed Isle. It's not like sometimes, you know, you get to go to the frigid wasteland of Nazgoroth or something like that. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. The dungeons themselves are procedurally generated with new loot, new treasure, etc., etc. A warrior in need of redemption journeys north to purge the many sins that burden the soul. No sooner had this pilgrimage to Northvale begun when the air grew thick with the foul stench of unholy creatures from the Nethermist. Will Crusader reach Northvale, or will your fate be sealed by the legions of Nethermist abominations? We will start our adventure here. So, immediately you will see what I think is the easiest thing to praise about Card Dungeon. I almost called it something else there. But it presentation-wise looks super, super interesting. And I don't mean interesting in the way that, you know, like, oh yeah, Uncle Jim is interesting. He hasn't quite been the same since, you know, he was deployed. No, this is something completely different. This is just evocative of tabletop RPGs. Every character has like their stand that they stand on, and they're two-dimensional, and you can pan the camera around. So it's a 3D game that most of the time you're gonna want presented in kind of like a 2.5D Paper Mario style fashion in order to see all the information that's available. You know, I'm not necessarily, I do like the tiles. I like the tile set a lot. I'm not a huge fan of like the 3D models of like the mushrooms and stuff like that, but for the most part, I think it's a really visually interesting looking game, and that's definitely its biggest strength. Beyond the mechanics, which are also interesting, and I'll talk about that. Why don't we talk about that right now? So, it's very... There's not a lot of stuff on the screen, but it is somewhat mechanically complex. There's a little bit of more moving parts than you would probably expect, given what you're looking at right now. These 3 cards at the bottom are not really resources that you spend. These are actually your abilities. So as the Crusader, you get to keep 3 abilities, unless there's some kind of positive trait that lets you have more. You start with Flash of Steel, so this is a blindingly quick attack, which deals 2 damage. Heal, magically heals you for 3 health points. And Shock Blast, electrocutes your enemy, deals 2 damage, and stuns your enemy for 3 turns. And we can see in our guidebook here what stun is. Stun, stun, stun. Creatures stunned will miss more often. So we can look at that. You'll be consulting this occasionally to see information about status effects and stuff like that. What's interesting about this is that there's a huge variety of cards in the game, and I think that's a great strength. Not only are there a huge variety that we'll see, but every card has a certain quality indicator associated with it. All the cards we start with are poor. Poor cards are like the worst version, I think, of the cards that we can get. So you can actually get a common version of Flash of Steel, and that'll be a blindingly quick attack that does 3 damage, or a rare version or a fine version of Flash of Steel that does 4 damage. So you're going to be looking for those cards. What's also interesting and occasionally frustrating, maddening based on a lot of the Steam reviews I've read, is that cards have deterioration. So you know if you're playing like a Dark Souls or something like that, you go to fight a boss and it's like, oh, your weapon's in danger, and you're like, shit, well, I've got to go back and repair it, or maybe I have to deal with this shit while fighting this boss. I have no chance. That happens a lot. You can pretty easily find yourself, you know, watching a card degrade and running out of an option to attack. So if you lost Flash of Steel and Shock Blast, we would not have any recourse to deal damage and would probably be screwed. So that's something. Card management and ability management is a really interesting mechanic, sometimes frustrating, but I think also a crux of the game that actually works pretty well. Let's actually play this freaking thing now at this point. So it's a turn-based dungeon crawler. You just use the mouse to move around and control the camera. Well, you don't actually have to attack the wildlife, and originally, well, we can't really do much with that. By the way, you have a rudimentary inventory system, but you can't, like, take potions with you, so you might as well just take them as you see them. You can't click and drag them into your inventory, to the best of my knowledge, anyway. The first time I played through, like, the first mission in the game, basically, I was like, why wouldn't I attack the enemies? They drop loot. Well, the reason you don't want to attack the enemies is that every card has like resource or durability associated with it, and the more you attack, the more likely it is that your attacking card is going to break, which is going to be really bad business. So I don't want to take that either, because there was nothing there. So we're just going to move around and looting, and that is a cool mechanic that the enemies, at least the natural fauna of the level, don't necessarily aggro you until you aggro them, but at the same time, it makes the first levels here kind of boring, as you're just like, 80% of the enemies I don't even get to attack. I could choose to attack them if I wanted to. Alright, Poison Dart. Small but deadly. The Poison Dart deals damage over 5 turns. So, this is, we can see a mana cost associated with it here, of 3. Everything costs mana, even our physical attacks. It's just a resource that basically represents our action points, I guess you can assume it, or consider it that way. And we regenerate mana passively every turn, more if we choose to rest, which is basically like our waiting option. So yeah, it's a fine card, which means it does a decent amount of damage. Dealing damage over 5 turns means I think that it does 5 damage total. 5 damage over time for 3 mana is okay. So I'm going to take this and we'll replace our healed card with it. The meta that I have gravitated towards, and I'm not assuming that this is a good thing, or like the exact best way to play, but the meta that I have gravitated towards is take as much offensive potential as you possibly can, because you do not want to lose offensive cards as you come close to the point at which you're going to be fighting tanky enemies. There's nothing worse than just having no ability to deal damage, and you can easily have that happen if you mismanage it. This is a sleeping enemy that is also, again, something that I don't necessarily need to attack because it's just natural fauna. Yeah, it's not flora. We will find natural flora as well. Sometimes it'll poison us. Exploding corpse. It's a fine card. Target a corpse and blow it up, dealing 7 damage to every enemy within 2 squares of the corpse. No loot will be available. That's a little frustrating that no loot will be available, but that's a lot of damage. I think we could probably consider taking this instead of Shock Blast. And now we have 2 fine cards. I think, now don't necessarily quote me on this, but I think that fine cards last a little bit longer in terms of durability. They also do more damage, but I do believe that they last longer as well. I can't really offer enough praise for the visual elements of the game. Like, I really think that it's cool the way that, you know, everything's kind of outlined in this, like, papercraft style. They have the standees that they're on. And the way that it fills in looks really cool as well with the stuff that gets dropped from the ceiling. It really gives it a cool kind of, like, papercrafty vibe. However, there are some complaints, and this is, I rarely complain about user experience type stuff, or user interface type stuff, but, sometimes the visual language of the game makes it hard to tell what's going on when you rotate. Like, your health and mana are located down here. There is no tilt, as far as I know, on the camera, so sometimes it can be obscured by the stuff on the walls. And also, if you have to rotate, like, behind, you can't see it. It would be really nice if, even though it would ruin the illusion a little bit, you know, the tiles are square. If you rotated the, at least the health and mana rotated with you so that you could see it easily. Or, you know, another good possible option for this would be to just take the health and mana and put them up here at the top of the screen so that visual language is conveyed a little bit more easily and without really interrupting the knowledge of what's coming across on the screen, if you know what I mean. And again, you might be saying, well, that's like a pretty kind of pseudo-academic, pretentious complaint, but it is the kind of stuff that, for me, leads to a little bit more of an uneven experience, and I find myself being like, I would just like it a little bit more. It's like, you know, death by, I'm not going to say 1,000 paper cuts, but like 6 or 7 paper cuts, it's a little unpleasant. So we have some enemies here. I am just going to choose to rest for a turn in the hopes that they walk into me. It's got that standard kind of like, dungeon crawly type meta where you're like, if I'm X tiles away from the enemy, I want to move. If I'm not, I want to rest so that they move into me and I get the first attack. So let's try using our Flash of Steel. Kind of sucks, I think, here. This guy has 5 HP, so if we do Poison Dart and poison him, he should die in 5 turns. Oh, it does 2 damage per turn, actually. That's awesome. So we're stunned. We also have Combat Advantage. Creatures granting combat advantage are easier to hit. Okay, I actually didn't know that. I assume that, like, when I get hit and I get combat advantage from being hit, I'm like, okay, something doesn't make sense here, but that makes sense now. So they hit you, you get like more information on them or something like that. So this enemy's gonna die next turn before they get a chance to attack, which is good. Every enemy when it dies drops loot. Bloodbath. Target a creature and explode their blood out of their body. It's a poor version of the card. It costs 8 mana. They take 2 damage and you heal for 2 and they skip 2 turns. It's a good card. Like, I've used it to good effect in the past, but it's terrible in that poor version where it only does, like, basically next to no damage. So we took a little damage there. As a Crusader, we can pretty much think of damage as or health as a resource. We'll take our mana potion. Because we have that passive ability, Crusaders Breath, that allows us to get a lot of our health back. Basically, it's like a 20% chance or something like that. I can't remember if we looked at it. Picked up some gold there. Gold is, I misclicked there. Gold is a resource that we will use, as you might expect, when we come to a shopkeeper. I believe the shopkeeper shows up at the final level of every single mission. And, there, we had it happen right there. The trait thing means that we just healed. The shopkeeper allows you to buy health and mana upgrades. At least that's the only thing that I've seen from the shopkeeper so far. And it's actually very considerable health and mana upgrades. So this, I think, is the game's way of being like, how far ahead can we shoot this? Not far enough, apparently. I think it's the game's way of being like, you know, I don't have an experience mechanic, so instead, no, still can't use it. I don't have an experience mechanic, so instead, I'll just do this. You know, you can buy health and mana upgrades yourself. So I would very much love to replace Flash of Steel with maybe something else, because it's not really, like, 2 damage is not really that amazing for us. What do you have right now? You have 1 HP. Well, if you're gonna die anyway, I'll just move behind this barrel so I don't end up wasting my card here. Take our mana potion. Sincerely, card management is an extremely, extremely important part of the game. You might think that I'm being ridiculous by not attacking enemies, especially the bats and the random kind of like turtles and stuff that can drop loot for us, but you're gonna chew through your cards super quickly, and that is not going to be good for business. I can't stress enough that it's so maddening to find yourself without an attack card when you're fighting an enemy. So that's why I do as few attacks as possible in order to make sure that I have enough for the future. Lightning Chain. Lightning never hits the same spot twice. Create a lightning storm which deals 4 damage and stuns all enemies in the area for 3 turns. Remember, stun makes it less likely enemies will hit. It doesn't stop them from doing their turn. It's a fine version of the card, a little mana intensive, but we can afford it. We don't have that many high mana cards, so we'll put that here, replace Flash of Steel, and now we have a few decent attack types, I think, that we can use. So when is each stage of this mission over? Each stage of the mission is over after you fight and kill a mini-boss, which has a tendency to drop some loot. This is probably the mini-boss. No? Okay, it's through this door, maybe. So it's pretty samey in that sense, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. How much HP you have? You have 5. I'm still going to use Poison Dart, because it does seem to be like our best option here, but then we should move away so that he can't hit us too much. But again, we're gonna heal passively anyway. I'm assuming that it's easy at the start here because we're on like an early mission, right? We'll come in here. So I'm not complaining about the difficulty of the game necessarily. Common card creates an earthquake around the targeted tile. All called in the quake take 2 damage, grants combat advantage, and are stunned for 3 turns. So for more expensive mana cost and less damage, although it does have another status effect, I don't think it's worth replacing lightning for that. Ooh, we got we opened that treasure chest and got like a mana shrine that gave us more mana. We also have a health potion. This is a neutral enemy, not necessarily an unfriendly enemy. I will say as well, there are a couple of problems I have. Let me just see what my gold is at in case we do find a shopkeeper. 21 is almost enough to buy something. It's a little slow-paced at times because when there is any enemy on the screen, you only get to move 1 tile at a time. That's sensible when there's aggroed enemies on the screen, but the fact that that condition still applies when there's only the neutral enemies on the screen is really annoying. If you find like a big room or a long hallway or something like that, it's so frustrating and takes so long because you're like, okay, I've got to move 10 tiles. I can only move 1 tile right now because there's a bat on the screen. Let's talk about, it's probably this guy. Once they get far away, that stops applying, but it's unreasonably far away in my opinion. They'll be like, there's a bat on the screen. It's never going to interact with me, but I still have to wait for its turn to finish. It's almost got that like, what was that Nintendo, squad-based, turn-based tactics game that came out this year? Steam... You know what I'm talking about. The one from the Fire Emblem guys. Anyway, we'll just call it Steam Game. One of the big complaints in the reviews for that when it first came out, before the patch came out, was that enemy turns take too long to resolve. I've noticed a little bit of that early in this game as well, for my tastes at least. There's a lot of situations where I'm like, man, we know how this is going to play out, I just wish it went a little bit faster. And again, like, I like this game, and I like it a lot more after about an hour of play than I did after about 10 minutes. After about 10 minutes, I was like, I get it, but it seems like kind of a one-trick pony. Oh, we got equipment. Adds 4 to your evasion bonus. So equipment we can wear in our equipment slots here. So we will do so. And that gives us +4 to evade, which is fairly nice. We can have a lower chance to get hit. Our character does, is persistent. They get built up over the missions. What is this? Just a health potion sitting in the puddle there. Yeah, I was guilty of thinking it was a little bit of a one-trick pony the first time, or the first little bit that I played it. Let's just do, like, Poison Dart is almost, like, mathematically the best choice for us in most of our situations here. But the more I play of it, the more I realize there is a little bit of strategic depth, and even if it's, or maybe even a lot of strategic depth, and even if it's not necessarily my favorite mechanic in a dungeon crawler ever, the idea of, like, deteriorating cards is actually really, really cool, and I think it's novel enough. The question is whether or not it's novel enough combined with all the other stuff, both good and bad, to make it worth a $10 asking price. I think I err a little bit more on the side of than I do on the side of like, I think it's I think it is worth $10, but I also think that if there's, games within the genre, stuff like Desktop Dungeons, Darkest Dungeon sort of feels semi-similar to this in a way. If you haven't played stuff like that, you're probably a little bit better off with those, but also this, to me, is, and I don't hew to this kind of criticism that much anymore, because I find it kind of too convenient, but I think this is the kind of game where if you're interested, it actually is like a perfect wait and see. If it gets 50% off in a sale, for $5, it's a steal. Like, you could easily get a nice afternoon of entertainment out of this, in my opinion. And it's very accessible. Like, as long as you don't find yourself too frustrated by deteriorating cards, which we haven't seen that much of. But you can see, actually, that our Poison Dart card is deteriorating. Like, it's starting to get a little worn down here. It doesn't wear all the way up to the top. Eventually, it'll just break from this state. So I'm actually going to take this Flash of Steel card to replace Poison Dart. And that's what's cool about the strategic trade-offs, is, like, sometimes you're giving up better cards for worse cards, just because nothing lasts forever. Although I will admit, this Shrine, if it blesses us, will make all of our cards hit maximum durability again. So it would have been a terrible decision for me to do that. And it blessed me. So yeah, it was a bad decision for me to do that. But there you go. Now you know what mistakes not to make in the future. So yeah, it's a game that I'm somewhat mixed on, but more positive than I thought I would be after the first little bit of play. It's not a shit PC port. There are some things that make it clear that it is a port, and it's not fully optimized. Like, it runs fine, except for the weird framey stuff in the main menu. But the UI is clearly designed for iOS, it's designed for phone resolutions. At least the aspect ratio, I should say, not necessarily the resolution. It scales fine, like, it looks pretty good. Occasionally there's some, like, jagginess on the end of fonts and stuff like that, or the end of letters and numbers and stuff like that, but it's not really that distracting. If you're the kind of person who just on principle will not pay $10 for a port of a phone game, well, that's on you. Like, why are you even watching the episode still at this point? I'm gonna try to bait this guy into coming this way so I don't have to walk into him. The AI is pretty stupid, but I think it's pretty stupid because I'm still in the early game. Like, you can set a trap. There's cards that you can get that can actually just drop, like, lava traps on the ground, and enemies will just walk into them over and over and over. But I kind of take that as... I don't insult the game for that. I'm not saying, like, it's bad logic or anything like that. Rather, I think it's like, these enemies are meant to be dumb. This is basically the tutorial level. You can also see... Oh, I wonder if the claw mark means that that's a mini-boss that's through there. Nope. Not that I can tell, anyway. I think the game does have some pacing problems as well. Like, not just slow movement when there's a neutral enemy on the screen, which I do still think is a little silly, but I can understand if they've tested it and it doesn't work properly the other way. Lightning Stab. Target adjacent foe that gets stabbed takes 4 damage and is stunned for 3 turns while being pushed 2 tiles. It's 4 mana, but it has a lot of status effects associated with it, so I'll replace Flash of Steel with that. I wish we saw some of the more interesting cards like trap-based cards and like movement control cards. This is what I was actually going to get at when I was talking about pacing issues. This is our first level here, and my hope was to kind of show off one typical level, and I think that's, you know, I wish you hadn't stood there, because you're going to slow me down a little bit here. Powerful Stab. It's a poor card, so I'm actually just going to discard it right away. Sometimes you'll need to take those if your durability's screwed, but... See, like, you're incentivized sometimes to kill the neutral enemies because it's so much faster to move once they're not bothering you on the screen. Anyway, the missions are a little overlong, in my opinion. That's my own personal taste, you know. I'm the kind of guy who plays games like Dungeons of the Endless and is like, well, if I have to save midway through, I'm probably not coming back. And that's, you know, my own personal kind of Everest there. I prefer games that do move a little bit faster. This is a little bit slower, and, you know, if you wanted to put that in a positive way, you easily could. It's a little bit more methodical. I can't believe we're not at the mini-boss, though, and it's really frustrating when you go in a super wrong direction, hit a dead end, and then you have to cross by, like, 50 neutral enemies on your way back, to where the mini-boss has to be. It's a little annoying. I keep missing with this attack, but again, it doesn't matter. We're at very low risk in the early game to get killed. But it has happened. Like, I've died on the 2nd level. But largely that was just due to not having any attack options. Please walk backwards so I don't have to murder you. You know, you can see, it's actually conveyed pretty clearly in the visual language how our cards are doing. Like, this Lightning Stab card, it's starting to fade a little bit. It's not as full color as it used to be. Not as, I'm not looking for opaque. What's like the layer of visibility in Photoshop? You know what I mean. The opacity has gone down. After that, that's like the first phase. There we go. Your mini boss will be in here now. That's the first phase of it being like degraded, and then after that, it'll lose the bottom of the card, and then you know that it's pretty close to going here. So we got to be careful because we could lose out on that pretty quickly. The spiders can move a lot. We want to get to this mini-boss as soon as possible because he actually has an ability that summons more enemies, so we don't want to find ourselves just, like, dealing with the riffraff because he's going to summon more and more enemies over and over. So it's actually, I think, better for us to just go kill the boss. And it should be relatively easy. I mean, again, this is not a game that is, in its early stages at least, high strategy, but that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily difficult as well. But largely, I think that's based on you not mismanaging the cards that you have. As soon as you get that under control and you don't take like 3 defensive cards or 3 cards that are way too high mana to actually use, you'll be in a better state. I actually am in a little bit of a risky position here. What we could do, Lightning Chain deals 4 damage and stuns all enemies in the area for 3 turns. Let's try this here. Oh, I really thought it would hit the enemies in the bottom as well. I died! Oh my god, you know why I died? I aggroed that freaking neutral turtle, and then he spit out that acid cloud. That's a classic Northern Lion. It's like, oh, yeah, this is easy. It's a little easy here in the early game. Admittedly, I've never used that ability before and ended up killing myself as a result. I think, honestly, this might be a little bit on the shorter side, but it's a relatively good introduction to what's going on in Card Dungeon. The only other stuff that's going on here, you know, as you might expect from a mobile port, and this is not me talking down about mobile games, they do tend to be more minimalistic and simplistic in terms of what they like offer in terms of modes. You have new game, you have continue, so you can save. I don't believe there are multiple save files, but I've never lasted really long enough to check it. There's a lot of stuff to unlock. You find knowledge gems throughout the dungeons that you can use to unlock them, so there is some replayability there. I'm 50-50 on Card Dungeon. For the most part, I think it's pretty good. I think it would benefit from a little bit more optimization for a 16:9 resolution, which is the kind of thing that I rarely care about, but it's noticeable here, I think, for sure. Like, can't you just picture, like, a phone screen occupying the middle of your monitor right now and being like, yeah, this works. Anyway. Again, it's not like me turning on my nose at PC or at mobile games, which I play on occasion. Actually, it's more just when I got this big monitor and there's all this kind of wasted space on the side of it. I just ache for something to fill it. Just control click, stretch it out a little bit. Anyway, that's a gross simplification. I'm bad at it, and you know, hopefully provided a decent display of what not to do, but there are some interesting mechanics. The idea of your abilities being tied to cards and your cards degrading so that, you know, you don't even have like a basic attack or a basic heal or anything like that. You constantly have to be shuffling new stuff in and out of your card rotation. That's really cool. Occasionally frustrating as well. Presentation is really nice. You can tell it's, you know, lovingly evocative of what I assume is beloved source material in tabletop games and collectible card games. It's mechanically a little slow. It's not my ideal pace for a game, but it's got some interesting stuff going on, and certainly this is, like, for me, the prototypical game of, like, I don't think $10 is too expensive. I'm glad it's priced not at $15, which is what a lot of games of this scope would probably be priced at now. So good on them for that. I'm not a business person, so I don't know if that's good or bad business-wise. And to be honest with you, I don't really care. But from a consumer perspective, I think that's good. And $10 for, you know, a few hours of enjoyment out of this, at bare minimum, at least if you, as long as you know what you're getting into going in, is a pretty good value proposition. But again, this is like the prototypical example of, if you get this on a sale, I think you are going to have a much more positive opinion on it than you might if you pay full price. But that's not to say that it's not necessarily worth full price, and it's not necessarily to say that it's worth your time if you don't like what you see but you find it on a sale. But anyway, if you like what you see, and let's just give the most non-committal criticism possible, if you like what you see and are a fan of the genre and find it at a price point which is amenable to your current financial situation, consider picking it up with this as a guide. In any case, if you're interested in picking up Card Dungeon, there will be a link in the video description below to pick it up on Steam. $10 US, as mentioned, just came out. I'm not sure if there's an opening week discount. It's a thumb pointed at the side, as if I was a Roman consul deciding the fate of a gladiator, and then tilted clockwise 15 degrees, 20 degrees, somewhere in there. Mostly positive on it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, click the like button. It helps out a great deal. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more in the future. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.